Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Greetings, drowsy spirit. Tonight, I will tell you a story that will help you fall asleep soundly. Remember to subscribe for more bedtime stories and like the video before we start. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments section. I would also love to know what story you would want to hear next. I never imagined that, in my mid-30s, with a child on her hip and a divorce decree in the mail, I would have to start over. But that's just the way life is. You're choosing nursery paint colors with your spouse 1 minute, and then you're attempting to explain to your 3-year-old why daddy no longer lives here. 6 months had passed since Ryan's departure. Somewhere in Santa Rosa, he had taken up residence with a yoga instructor. He had compared the house near his workplace to an abandoned stage set, with half of everything gone, as if someone had torn pages out of a tale in the middle of a sentence. The worst part was the silence, which was only broken by Ella's sobs. At roughly 2 a.m. every night, she would begin to scream, the kind of scream that sounded more profound, like fear, rather than like awful dreams. It had been weeks since I had slept through the night. I lived in a small hamlet north of Sacramento, where I knew no one. My mother in Oregon, and my sister in Texas. It sounded flexible, working remotely for a tiny marketing agency. But as Ella hurled her toys across the living room, I had to type through tears. The air was heavy with the scent of baby wipes and sour milk. There were heaps of dishes. Every time, my coffee was reheated twice. Without attempting, I had begun to lose weight. Then one morning I discovered a flyer stuck in the handle of the front door. The white paper was clean and well printed. Skilled childcare provider. Accredited. Loves children as much as her own. Qualified in CPR. Background investigation. Give Ruth a call. There was even a small teddy bear doodle in the corner. I'm not sure why, but that detail struck me as reassuring, almost maternal. Before calling, I left the paper on the counter for 3 days. Ruth's voice was warm, deep, and assured when she answered. The voice that gives you a sense of security when you shouldn't. She said, "Hi, sweetheart," I confessed, embarrassed. "You sound exhausted. New mom, recently divorced." "Oh, honey," she murmured, laughing softly. "I hired her that same day, and I've been there, done that. You need a break." Ruth was sharp, perhaps in her late 40s, with smooth silver hair pinned up neatly, wearing a pale blue cardigan and black slacks. Her skin looked perfect, almost too perfect, and she smelled faintly of lavender and something like old books. When she first came over in the afternoon, I expected her to be grubby or grandmotherly, but Ella talked to her right away. There was no crying, no hesitation. The moment Ruth leaned down and said, "Hello, sunshine," I nearly cried when Ella melted into her arms. That first night, I took my first shower in 2 days, ate a hot meal, and slept for 4 straight hours. When I woke up, Ruth had cleaned Ella's bottles, folded the laundry, and even tidied the toys. I thought maybe everything would be all right for the first time in months, but little things started to irritate me. First, I noticed that Ella's toys were neatly arranged along the window sills, facing the outside. Then came the humming. At night, when I checked the baby monitor, I would hear static and, underneath it, faint music, a lullaby, slow, almost whisper soft. I assumed it was the neighbor's TV until I realized the monitor wasn't even plugged in. One day, I found a circle of blocks on the floor with a doll sitting in the middle. I laughed it off, thinking maybe Ruth was teaching Ella some new game. "The songs that her soul remembers are the ones she enjoys listening to," she remarked. "What are you saying?" "Oh, never mind, dear. Just something my mother used to say. The way she said soul sent chills through me. I inquired, smiling uncomfortably. And one afternoon I arrived home early from work, and Ruth didn't hear me enter. "Ruth," I said, and she jumped a little before turning around with that same two calm smiles. The room was quiet, but then I heard Ruth's voice, a soft, rhythmic whispering. "My sweet mom is almost ready," she said, and I froze. I pushed the door open, just enough to see her sitting on the floor back to me, rocking Ella slowly. In her lap was an old photograph of a woman holding a baby, torn and water damaged. "Oh, my dear, you surprised me," merely displaying some family photos to her. Babies adore faces. Ruth wasn't meant to be there that night, but I forced a grin despite my stomach churning. "Right? Yeah, I dreamed that night that someone was singing over a crib, the same tune from the monitor. When I woke up, the faint but genuine music was still coming from Ella's room. I thought I was dreaming when I ran down the hall and saw Ella sleeping peacefully. However, when I looked out the window, I swear I saw a woman in a blue cardigan walking away down the driveway." Ryan didn't believe me, and when I called him, he sounded irritated. "Grace, you're overthinking," he said. "You've spent too much time cooped up in that place. Perhaps she simply makes you think of your mother." I yelled, "This isn't about my mom," and she left. I sense it. It was painful, but I wondered if he was correct. Perhaps it was sleep deprivation, or perhaps trauma simply caused me to see ghosts when none existed. "If she's helping you, then take the help," he groaned. "Jesus grace, not everyone's out to get you." Remained silent until the day I spotted Ella's room's door, which was actually a square cut out in the floorboard beneath her crib, with an even wood grain that gave the impression that it had been forced open because Ella kept pointing down there and saying, "Nana sleep." Our grandma was absent. "Morning, Grace," Ruth remarked when she arrived the following morning, humming that same fucking song. She entered Ella's room without knocking. "Did you get some rest?" "Yes, I did. My little one loved it." "You have a daughter?" "I had," she said simply, and her voice cracked just a little before the smile returned. "She was special." I didn't push it, but that word had stuck with me like a thorn. That night, I put my laptop camera on the shelf, pointing toward the crib. "Hey, may I ask, where did you learn that lullaby you sing to her?" I lied. I told myself it was just to calm me down, to show that I was dreaming. The video froze for a moment at 3:07 a.m., then flashed back to life, showing Ruth standing in front of the mirror with Ella, whispering repeatedly, her hair unpinned and wild, and she was wearing a long white nightgown instead of her cardigan. "They took you from me. It is as obvious as day. However, I located you once more." I closed my laptop and didn't tell Ruth. She was on camera the following morning. I needed to find out more, so I searched her up. I found an old phone number, references, and everything from the flyer, but nothing. The locations were phony, and the number was untraceable. I told Ryan everything that night, and he reluctantly came over, but agreed to stay the night. "You're scaring yourself," he said, as we sat in the kitchen. "Just watch the footage," I said, sliding the laptop toward him. "You're scaring yourself," he said. This article from a local paper was archived online. Ruth A. Harland, a former pediatric nurse, was fired after an infant went missing. No charges were filed. My stomach dropped. Ryan's face was devoid of color when the video captured Ruth speaking at the mirror. "Okay," he murmured softly. "We're calling the police." The doorbell rang before he could answer it, and Ruth was standing there grinning and carrying a grocery bag. "I thought I'd bring dinner," she said gently. "Homemade soup for my girls." Ryan and I exchanged glances. "That's considerate, Ruth," I said, and my hand trembled as I forced a courteous smile. "But we're okay tonight." "Oh," she said softly, her eyes darting to the stairs where Ella's toys were on display. "She missed me." Her tone wasn't one of inquiry. "Please, Ruth," Ryan said, stepping forward. "We need some space." She tilted her head. She turned to go, but as she did so, she whispered almost to herself, "Mothers never keep what isn't theirs." We locked the doors at night, and Ryan remained on the couch. At 3 in the morning, the baby monitor screeched. An Ella's shrill, panicked cry could be heard. Her expression was calm. "Of course, I just came to say goodbye. Of course, I just came to say goodbye." I sprung to my feet and raced to her empty room, where the window was open, the curtains fluttered, and the chilly night air was leaking in. Ruth was standing barefoot in the dirt, cradling Ella, swaying gently, her eyes closed, her face wet with tears. "Ruth, please," I yelled. We searched the yard, the street, and nothing turned up. I was on the verge of going insane when we heard a faint hum coming from the backyard. It was the same lullaby that was coming from behind the shed. Ruth opened her eyes, looked at me, and whispered. I had her first. When the police arrived, she didn't fight back. Instead, she just looked exhausted, elderly, and broken. She continued to hum that lullaby as they cuffed her, the same tune that sometimes wakes me up. Later, the detective informed us that Ruth had lost her newborn daughter in a house fire 20 years prior, had spent time in a mental hospital, and had worked as a nanny under false pretenses 4 months. A year has passed, and Ella is doing well. However, occasionally, when I pass her room at night, I hear a faint hum through the baby monitor, that same melody, low and distant, and I unplug the monitor each time. Nevertheless, when I open her door, she is always awake, smiling at the mirror. They discovered pictures in her car of dozens of babies, including Ella, some of whom were unidentified. It's been 7 months since Megan left, 7 months since the house stopped smelling like coffee and lavender shampoo, 7 months since I stopped acting like everything was fine, and I worked the front desk at St. Vincent Urgent Care, a small clinic that is open 24 hours a day just off I-83 in York County. And once, only once, I noticed a reflection behind her that wasn't mine. I never imagined I'd end up working nights again, especially not after the divorce. But bills don't pay themselves, and sleep is difficult when your bed is half empty. Primarily sees intoxicated patients, drug users, and those who cannot afford the hospital. I try not to think too much in between my 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. shifts. That night, the rain was pouring down like hellfire. The power had flickered 3 times since midnight, and the only other staff members on duty were Doctor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the hum sinking with the rain pelting the glass doors. The parking lot shimmered outside under the amber glow of a single flickering street lamp. The TV mounted in the corner played the music, and Patel, who was locked in his office doing paperwork, was doing paperwork when I cut my finger on a patient chart like a fool. It was a stupid paper cut, but it stung like hell. "Perfect," I muttered, shoving my finger in my mouth and looking around for a band-aid. But there wasn't one in sight. The anchor woman's voice was calm but uneasy, and they're urging residents not to engage. The woman's identity is still unknown, and officials say if approached, do not answer her questions, particularly if she asks you to say yes. Yes, I muttered out loud, almost laughing. Overnight news, low volume, closed captions on. The headline at the bottom caught my attention. I had witnessed more bizarre incidents in my work, such as people talking to walls, swallowing batteries, and claiming that demons followed them into the emergency room. York County was full of untrue stories. I shook my head and resumed typing up intake forms. However, at 2:30 a.m., the automatic doors opened on their own, and I looked up. I stood, stretched, and walked toward the entrance, my shoes squeaking on the wet tile, the storm outside painting everything in motion, branches bending, puddles rippling, shadows shifting, and then I saw her. The wind howled outside, sweeping sheets of rain across the pavement, and the glass doors kept opening and closing repeatedly, as if something invisible was pacing just outside. I muttered to myself, probably a sensor glitch. I pressed the door button, and the glass parted with a hiss. "Ma'am, are you okay?" A woman stood under the awning, her outline ghosted by the rain, wearing a tattered red coat and soaked jeans clinging to her legs. Her jet black hair was plastered against her pale cheeks, giving the impression that she had been standing in the storm 4 hours. I tried to seem polite, but professional when I inquired, but she didn't respond. Her eyes, God, her eyes were unusual, not crazy, not wide, just vacant, as if no one was home. Do you need medical attention? I tried again. She shook her head slowly and began to walk closer, her boots squeaking against the tile and water pouring from her sleeves. Are you here for someone? Then she nodded. All right, I murmured, trying a smile. There was a pause. How about logging in? We'll try to find the patient for you. I moved a clipboard in her direction. She gazed down at it, but remained still. The small wooden cross on my desk caught her attention. Marlene's gift. She pointed at it without saying anything. She muttered, "Will you please move that?" I paused. Something about her voice chilled me. Even though it was kind, almost tender, I slipped the crucifix inside the drawer and responded, "Yeah, sure, better," she grinned. Her teeth were unusually bright for someone who appeared that disheveled, and her lips quivered. Then she grabbed the pen and stopped once again. "Are you still in love with her?" she inquired. My heart thumped. "Pardon me." Her gaze shifted up to mine. With a faked dry laugh, I asked, "You heard me. Do I still love who?" She asked, her smile growing. "Your spouse." My throat constricted as the word struck me like a blow. "How in the heck do you know?" She turned and left before I could say anything more. There was no sound of footsteps or farewell. At 3:45 a.m., the building felt colder. The vents hissed like whispers. Dr. Patel's office light was off. Marlene hadn't returned from her smoke break, and I stood there for a good minute waiting for her to return. When she didn't, I manually shut the doors and tried to shake it off. When I heard footsteps down the children's wing, I scowled because that area should have been deserted after midnight. I followed the sound down the dim hallway, the kind of quiet where every breath feels like a sin, and there, beneath the flickering exit sign, stood a boy who couldn't have been older than 8. I whispered, "Hey, friend, you lost. She keeps asking us questions." He mumbled, turning to face me, his eyes red with tears. "What questions?" My stomach fell as she added, "Say yes, and you'll see your mom again." He gave himself a hug. "Where is she?" He gestured toward the hallway. With my sneakers screeching on the floor, I hurried forward and said, "Room 6. The door to room 6 was partially open. There were no blankets on any of the beds inside, and the ives hung like veins torn from the wall. Little heaps of children's clothing were all that remained, and from the shadowy corner of the room came a voice that hummed quietly. I aimed the light from my phone at it. The red-clad woman, her head was cocked abnormally to one side, while her coat stood facing the wall. I went cold. As I said, "Ma'am," my voice wavered. She turned and said, "You can't be in here," she repeated. "Do you still love her?" In a deeper, more complex voice that seemed like two voices coming from the same mouth. I took a step back. "You must go now. I have no idea who the hell you are." She grinned. "Did you not say yes once? When you swore forever, you said yes. She pleaded with you not to leave, and you said yes." My breath caught. "How? How would you repeat it?" She muttered, "She will forgive you if you say yes." The lights buzzed like hornets and fluctuated furiously. I staggered back, slammed the door, and ran down the corridor. I yelled, "Dr. Patel." Down the corridor. I yelled, "Dr. Patel." Marlene. No answer. All the lights in the clinic went out when I got to the nurse's station. The lobby's TV was the only source of light, spewing static before going dark. There was a faint knock behind me. I pivoted. The storm screamed into the room as the glass doors slid open again on their own. Megan was standing there. Her clothing was the same rich red, and her hair was drenched. Her smile was soft and shaky. She nodded and added, "Megan, you look tired," and I paused. "Hey, Nate," she whispered quietly, as she used to do when she would wake me up with coffee before work. "You were missed." I was having trouble breathing. You're not authentic." Water gathered around her feet as she took a step closer. She said, "I am. You've just been dreaming without me." Her fingers touched mine. Too cold. My lips quivered. "You left me." Tears filled her eyes. "Say it," she whispered. "Say yes, and we can start over. No more nights alone. No more pain. I saw her face clearly for a moment. But it wasn't Megan's anymore. It was the other woman's. Her eyes were wide. Her smile stretched too far up her cheeks. And she screamed a sound that wasn't human, wasn't anything, and lunged. The storm outside wailed louder, and the wind pushed the door open wider. In the morning, the police reported that the children had never been registered patients here. Marlene was found outside in her car, eyes open, lips frozen mid-smile. Dr. Patel was never found. The woman in the red coat was said to have been dead 4 years. Megan's body was never recovered after a crash near I-83 last winter, the same place they found a shredded red coat by the roadside. And the moment the crucifix touched her, she disappeared. Rain continued to pound, my hands trembled, and my pulse hammered in my skull. I never thought I'd end up back in a small town like this again. After my divorce, I told myself I'd never go back to anywhere that reminded me of being trapped, but life has a funny way of pushing you where you don't want to go. My name is Rachel Clean, and I'm 33 years old, recently divorced, and living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in a quiet suburb outside of Buffalo. Sometimes, when I close the clinic alone, I still hear the automatic doors sliding open and a voice whispering behind me, "Do you still love her?" I never answer anymore because I know what happens when you say yes. I've been rebuilding my life piece by piece, and since my ex-husband Paul left me for a woman he met at his gym after 10 years of marriage. I caught them one afternoon when I got home early from work, and she was sitting on our couch wearing one of my sweaters. I didn't yell or throw anything. I just turned around and left. That was 2 years ago. I used to work full-time at a medical billing office, but after the pandemic layoffs, I started babysitting again to make ends meet. It's not glamorous, but the money helps keep the lights on. That's how I met the Tanners, a decent couple who both worked in real estate and recently moved into a large house on the outskirts of town. They had a 7-year-old boy named Owen who was quiet, intelligent, and courteous. He was sitting at the kitchen island when I first met him, drawing dinosaurs on printer paper, while his mother, Melanie, gave me a tour. "He's easy," she said, smiling as if she knew how fortunate she was. "But once he warms up to you, he'll talk your ear off." They needed someone to stay overnight Friday through Sunday for a friend's anniversary party in Lake George, and they offered $250 per night, so I accepted. It was supposed to be a simple job: movies, snacks, and bedtime stories, but that weekend turned into something I still can't talk about without my hands shaking. Apart from the weather, Friday night began normally enough. Snow had been falling since the early afternoon, and by 6 o'clock it had turned into a full-on blizzard, with the roads barely visible and street lights shining through the flurries like blurry halos. Melanie and her husband, Derek, were scheduled to depart at 7 o'clock, but by 7:30, Derek came downstairs with his suitcase and said, "We better go now, before we get snowed in. Emergency numbers are on the fridge," Melanie remarked with a kind grin. On Sunday evening, we should return. When they left, the house suddenly felt huge and too quiet. Owen was upstairs brushing his teeth when I heard the front door slam shut behind them. It was one of those new houses with open floor plans and tall windows. Beautiful, but it made me feel exposed. Every creak and whistle of the wind echoed. Owen came down in his pajamas and asked, "Can we watch a movie before bed?" I tried to seem positive as I answered, "Sure," and we decided on the Iron Giant and prepared some popcorn. He sat cross-legged on the couch, totally absorbed, when the storm outside howled like it was alive. I put him to bed at 10 o'clock. "Good night, buddy," I said, and he smiled drowsily. "You're nice. Mommy said you were going to be nice," he said, and for some reason, that line stuck with me. By 11:30, I was sitting on the couch in the living room, watching a low-volume rerun of Law and Order, while the snow continued to fall heavily, accumulating against the sliding glass doors that led to the backyard deck. I heard a knock while scrolling through my phone. It wasn't a courteous neighborly knock either. It was slow and heavy, followed by 3 thuds and silence. At first, I assumed Melanie had forgotten something and returned, but when I looked at the time, 11:47 p.m., I realized that wasn't the case because nobody would be driving in that weather. I froze, the heater turned on, the wind shook the windows, and then there were more knocks, louder and more impatient, and I muttered to myself, Jesus Christ. I got up silently and walked tiptoe toward the front hallway. The porch light was on, but the entryway light was out, so the frosted glass panels next to the door were softly lit. A large, wide figure in a thick coat was standing there, and he didn't move, so I didn't open the door. I remained silent and just stared until the figure moved closer, so close that I could see his breath fogging up the glass. My chest constricted, so I slowly retreated and reached for my phone on the coffee table. But before I could get it, the knocking became violent, and he was now slamming the door. Open up! A man's voice screamed through the storm. Deep, my throat tightened as I heard another person say, "We know someone's in there." I wanted to rush upstairs and grab Owen, but I stopped again as I heard the door handle rattle, indicating that they were attempting to enter. "Stop it." My voice shaking, I yelled, "I'm calling the police." They continued to bang harder as a result. One of them chuckled. The operator's tone was calm, unpracticed. "Ma'am, what's your address?" I handed it to her, my words leaking out too quickly, and she said, "Officers are on their way, but the weather is delaying response times." I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking, and dialed 911, 911. "What's your emergency?" I said, barely breathing. "There are men trying to break into the house I'm babysitting at. They're banging on the front door. I think there are more than one." "Does the household have a child?" Yes, he's sleeping upstairs." "All right, take the kid and go somewhere safe in the house. Stay on the line with me." I didn't think clearly, so I just said, "Okay," and hung up because I didn't want my voice to reveal my location. The banging stopped. There was total silence, which was worse in some way. I looked through the blinds once more and saw no one there. Swirling snow. "Perhaps they went," I muttered, taking a trembling breath. Then, from somewhere farther in the house, in the kitchen, I heard glass breaking. My heart was thumping so loudly that it seemed to reverberate through the hallway. Owen was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide. "Rachel, what's that noise?" I gasped aloud and ran upstairs, 2 steps at a time, trying not to trip. He nodded, but his lip quivered as I put a finger to my lips and whispered, "We have to be really quiet." I took his hand and ushered him into the small closet across the room, which was filled with board games and toys. I closed the door as quietly as I could and dragged him inside into my embrace. They were moving downstairs, and I could hear them whispering, boots crunching on glass, and then the sound of a drawer being pulled open. Something along the lines of, Owen began to weep softly into my shoulder, saying, "Check the rooms." We waited as I carefully covered his mouth and said, "Please, sweetheart, don't make a sound." The minutes seemed to drag on forever. There was a creak in the home. I could hear them even while the wind roared. The sound of footsteps ascending the stairs. They were giggling. Among them, one remarked, "I told you I saw lights on." The floors moaned outside the bedroom. Then the door to the bedroom opened. I could see shadows moving from the little light beneath the closet door. One person entered, followed by another. I heard breathing, heavy, close, room for children. They whispered to each other. "You check the closet." I tightened all over. Owen could hardly move because I held him so tightly. His little heart pounded frantically against my chest. There were footsteps near the closet. The doorknob was touched. Then everything was broken by an outside sound. Sirens from the police. A curse was muttered by the man. _police. I could hear them scurrying down the steps. More footsteps. It smashed at the front door. For a long time, I was too scared to move and remained still. A loudspeaker outside was then thrown by a voice. "Officers, raise your hands and come out." I didn't open the closet door till after that. 5 males were discovered by the police hiding behind the shed in the garden. A block away, they had parked an old pickup vehicle. It seems that earlier that night, they had been robbing vacant homes by posing as snow shovelers and went door to door. There was a knife among them. In the pocket of another's coat were zip ties. Later, the officer informed me that if the storm hadn't caused them to slow down, they could have escaped prior to the arrival of backup. That made me sick to my stomach. Owen slept on my lap, still trembling in his sleep, as I sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped over me. Melanie sobbed and gave me a 1-minute hug when she and Derek returned on Sunday night. I was broken on the inside, despite my best efforts to appear tough. That night changed the way I think, the way my bones ached from fear. When I didn't feel safe in my own life, how did it feel to defend someone else? Even after several months, I still get frightened when someone knocks on my door. I have a new job, a new number, and a new lock. I came to a standstill. After that, babysitting. I believe I'm done, but I assured myself it was only temporary. I sometimes ponder what would have occurred if those sirens hadn't sounded at that precise moment, if I hadn't called in time, or if the sound had been muted by the rain. The distinction between being alive and having a story on the nightly news is a curious one. I think of that house, the sound of boots on glass, the whisper outside the closet, and the tiny shaking hand gripping mine in the dark every time it snows now. That night, I made it through. However, I doubt that I ever truly left it. At the time, I was 12 years old, the night that permanently split my family apart. I used to live in a beige 2-story home in a small town outside of Dayton, Ohio, with a maple tree in front and a squeaky porch swing that made noise whenever the wind blew. Most weeks, my mom was on business trips. She traveled frequently for her job at a pharmaceutical company. I didn't mind that it was typically just my dad and myself. We had a relaxed quiet between us, and he was occasionally harsh, but also humorous when he felt like it. He picked me up from school on Friday afternoon in his old black Chevy, the one that had the scent of coffee and engine oil. "How was school, then?" As he turned on the engine, he inquired. My gaze was fixed on the window. "All right, I suppose." He laughed quietly. I rolled down the window and mumbled, "Okay." "Huh, you always say that. You know, school was awful when I was your age, too." "Yeah, whatever." He sighed and turned to face me. "Evan, you know, sometimes it wouldn't hurt to talk." I didn't respond. Instead, I watched the houses go by as the sun sank behind the trees. I didn't say that I didn't love my dad. I did, but lately, my parents had been acting strangely. Silent dinners, hushed arguments, my mom's fake smiles. Even at the age of 12, I could tell something wasn't right. We came to a stop at a red light. "So, I got to ask you something," Dad said, tapping the steering wheel. "Tonight I have a work-related meeting that may run late. Do you think you'll be okay by yourself at home?" "I'll be all right, Dad. You're still my kid." But he hesitated and said, "Yeah, your mom is going to freak if I leave you alone. I might have to call someone to stay with you." "Seriously, I'm 12, not a baby. Before you say anything," I called a sitter. "Just for tonight, okay?" I moaned. "Come on, Dad." "Hey, don't start. It's just for a few hours." I went straight to my room and put on my headphones. An hour or so later, Dad knocked and came in with a plate of pizza. "Dinner of champions," he said, smiling. After he said that, the doorbell rang, and he told me to come downstairs and at least say hello like a decent human being. I froze when I entered the living room and saw a woman who looked maybe 25 years old, with pale blonde hair tied in a loose braid, dark eyeliner that made her eyes appear sharper than they should have, and a thin smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. "Her name is Rachel, and Lisa down the street highly recommends her," Dad remarked, almost cheerfully. "Evan, this is Rachel." "Hi," I said, and Rachel tipped her head, her smile widening. "Hey, kiddo, tonight, I'm excited to spend time with you." "All right, I'll be back before midnight," she said in a calm but off voice, like someone feigning gentleness. Dad laughed too loudly, perhaps to lighten the tense atmosphere. "You both need to behave." Softly, she laughed. "Don't worry, we'll be all right." The house felt different after he left. It was quieter, but not in a nice way. Rachel went to the couch and sat down, patting the cushion next to her. "Want to watch a movie?" I said, sitting a few feet away. She chose an old horror film from the streaming list, and I tried to concentrate, but I could feel her eyes darting toward me every few minutes. She would give me a small smile when I turned my head, then turn back to the TV as if nothing had happened. Eventually, I muttered, "I'm tired. I'm going to eat before going to bed." Already. I felt a peculiar weight in the air as I sat there staring at the flickering TV. "At least finish your pizza first. I'll heat it up for you," she said, bending forward. She entered the kitchen while humming a tune. Her face was blank as she returned, handed me the dish, and observed me eating. "Good. You remind me of my little brother," she remarked. "Yeah," I replied softly, and she smiled once again. He was also silent. Was I questioned? Her smile dimmed slightly. Yes. I didn't ask any more questions. Soon after, I closed my door and walked upstairs. I remained awake, listening for voices, footsteps, and other noises. However, the house remained motionless. Later, I peered through my blinds as I heard Dad's car pull in. He was speaking to Rachel while she stood outside. He was giggling once more, perhaps nervously, but laughing. Then she abruptly turned to face me directly at my window. I quickly ducked down. I was certain she heard my heart pounding so loudly. Rachel became our regular sitter after that evening. She was disliked by Mom from the beginning. When she told her father, she didn't trust that girl. He consistently dismissed her as unimportant. I would never use the phrase harmless to describe her. A few weeks later, Rachel spent the weekend with Mom when she was out on another vacation. It was an afternoon on Sunday, peaceful and bright. Rusty, our neighbor's dog, began barking at the fence while I was in the backyard chasing a football. He was a large, boisterous, and amiable golden retriever. I stumbled on a rock when he shocked me, severely scraping my knee. My shin was covered with blood. Rachel rushed out. "You poor thing." "Oh no." After assisting me inside, she cleaned the wound and carefully dressed it. "You're tough," she cheerfully said, "but you know what'll make it better." Curious, I nodded and said, "What?" "Want to see something cool?" She brought me back outside after grabbing some cookies from the kitchen. The dog ran up, wagging his tail and barking once again as she knelt by the fence and yelled, "Here, Rusty. Good boy," she said. "Watch this," and threw a cookie over, which caused Rusty to stop barking and begin sniffing. Then she grabbed a tiny rock and threw it directly at him, striking him in the eye. He staggered back, yelling in agony, and blood spilled over the grass. "Stop. See, now we're even," Rachel said, turning to face me with that same unsettling grin as I screamed in horror. "Both he and you are injured. Equilibrium." I sobbed as I rushed inside. I told my mother everything when she got home that night. She snapped. Rachel's face contorted into something horrifying. She screamed at her, called her a maniac, thrust the payment envelope into her hands, and cried, "Get the hell out of my house," cursing, "I don't want your money." My mother moved closer and said, "Derek hired me, not you. You will never again approach my son. Could you?" She smirked, leaned in, and whispered, "Hear me. We'll see." Then she walked away, slamming the door so forcefully that the frame shook. Mom and Dad got into the largest argument I've ever witnessed that night. Mom yelled, "This is exactly what I meant. You become overly at ease around folks you don't really know." Alice, she looked regular. I had no idea she was crazy. You were completely unaware that she was flirting with you in front of me. Give me a break, please. I listened to every word while sitting on the stairs and cradling my knees. By the end of the quarrel, my mom sobbed herself to sleep upstairs, and my dad had fallen asleep drunk on the couch. That night, as I stared at the pitch-black ceiling, I thought our family would never be the same. I was correct. I was awakened by sounds coming from downstairs at around 2 in the morning, sharp, like glass moving or metal scrapping, but not loud. I called quietly, "Mom," no response. I slipping off the bed, She made her way to the stairs. The lights were on in the living room. Then I caught sight of her, Rachel, with a revolver in one hand and my mom by the neck in the other. She stood in the center of our living room, her hair disheveled and her eyes wild. Dad stood with his hands up a few steps distant. "Please, Rachel, you misled me." She let out a scream. "You claimed to be concerned about me. We had something, you said." "I didn't say that. You aren't thinking clearly. Put down the gun, Rachel." Mom was having trouble breathing. "Give me a break." Rachel gripped harder. "Derek, she doesn't love you." "Yes, I do. Evan and you are both loved. We had the potential to be a true family." My knees became weak. I wanted to scream and run, but I was immobile. Dad stepped forward. "Rachel, please, let her go, and we can have a conversation." "No," she said, pushing her mother to the ground and aiming the rifle at her head. "Don't." Dad sprang at her. The sound of items cracking was screamed during the conflict. Then there was a loud bang. It all froze. Rachel clutched her chest and stumbled back, her eyes wild. She gave Dad the impression that she was in shock about what had just transpired. Then she passed out. With the revolver in his hand, Dad stood there shaking. Mom yelled and rushed toward me, drawing me in. She said, "Call 911." But her voice sounded distant. I had ringing in my ears. Statements were taken. When the police arrived, they snapped pictures. Dad was taken. He insisted that it went off accidentally. I didn't intend to. Again and again, Mom and I were honest with them, that he was attempting to keep her safe, that firing wasn't his intention. However, they continued to charge him. Months passed throughout the protracted trial. Reporters dubbed it the case of the babysitter. Everybody had a viewpoint. However, I was the only one who knew the truth. My father wasn't a killer. He was merely a man who acted in a last-ditch effort to protect his family from a crazy woman. I couldn't help but cry when he turned to face me the day he was convicted and said softly, "You be good, okay, kiddo. Don't let this define you," I said. "It's not fair." He gave a small smile. "Evan, life isn't fair. Still, you live it." I never saw him the same after they took him away. My mother and I relocated to a smaller town. She no longer discusses it frequently. I can occasionally hear her sobbing quietly through the wall at night. For my part, I continue to dream about the gunshot, the silence that followed, and that night. And occasionally, I question whether a babysitter is who she claims to be when I walk by a home where she is laughing with a child. Because darkness isn't necessarily the source of monsters. Sometimes they smile as they walk right through your front door. I had no idea that a simple babysitting job would leave me permanently haunted. It occurred shortly after my parents' divorce, which was one of the most trying times in my life. I was 19 at the time, just out of high school, and struggling to keep my composure. In order to live with my dad and her new partner, my mom had relocated to towns away. He wasn't a big talker, really. He immersed himself in work and alcohol following the divorce. I remained in our tiny rental flat on Portland's outskirts, attempting to determine what I should do with my life. I pulled late shifts for minimum wage at a gas station on Highway 30 as a part-time employee. There was never enough money. My phone bill was due, my fridge was empty, and I was behind on my rent. I recall wondering how long I could continue to act as though nothing was wrong when I lay on my mattress one night and stared at the ceiling fan that was squeaking overhead. I saw it at that moment. On the local Facebook community page, an advertisement appeared. It said, "Babysitter needed. Only 4 nights. $700 cash. Text or call." Below it was a phone number and the name, Angela Meyer. Tonight's for $700. I nearly earned that amount working at the gas station for 2 weeks. I made no hesitation at all. I took out my phone and sent her a text. "Hello. I spotted your babysitting advertisement. Is it still accessible?" She responded in less than a minute. "Indeed." She responded in less than a minute. "Indeed. Are you able to come tomorrow morning? It's a little urgent." We spoke for a while. She mentioned that she needed to travel to Salem for a real estate conference, and that she had a daughter named Ellie, who is 7 years old. She requested someone to watch her child overnight at her place, and return on Sunday night. Her speech sounded sincere, since it was courteous but hurried. She claimed it was okay when I informed her I didn't own a car. She could send me money via Venmo if I agreed to arrive early. She even promised to throw in an extra $50. I felt a little lighter by the time I went to bed that evening. I had something to look forward to for the first time in weeks. I packed a paperback book, a toothbrush, a sweater, some snacks, and my little rucksack the following morning. I informed my best friend Carl via text that I would be watching a house close to Willow Creek Road for a few days. He texted back, "Dude, are you certain it's not a fraud?" "Don't be concerned," I said. I called her and spoke with her. At last, she sounds truly renowned. Words. I was left off by the bus next to a desolate road that wound through the forest. I could hear a river nearby, and the air had a pine and rainy scent. I saw the house after 10 minutes or so of going up a gravel driveway, with a wraparound porch and a swing suspended from a large oak tree. The 2-story wooden house had a rustic feel. A red tricycle sat against the porch railing, and flower pots were on the steps. It appeared serene to serene. In fact, the door was knocked on. It opened after a few seconds, revealing a woman in her mid-30s. She had hazel eyes, shoulder-length auburn hair, and that worn-out yet polished appearance that real estate agents frequently have. She was dressed in trousers and a grey blazer. "You must be Aaron," she remarked, smiling broadly. The house had a subtle scent of coffee and vanilla candles. "Yeah, thanks for having me come on in." The kitchen was at the far end. The living room was large and open, and there was a stairway to the right. Everything was immaculate, as if it had recently been cleaned. A young girl appeared behind the couch. She was holding a plush bunny and had disheveled blonde hair. "Ellie," Angela replied. "This is Aaron. He's going to stay with you while Mom is gone." "Okay." Angela showed me the kitchen, the spare bedroom where I would be staying, and Ellie's room upstairs. She said there was plenty of food in the refrigerator, and I put my number on the counter in case of emergencies. Ellie nodded shilly, but she remained silent. Ellie goes to bed at 9. Before she left, she gave me an envelope containing half of the payment, $350 in crisp bills. "I'll give you the rest when I'm back Sunday night," she said, grabbing her suitcase, and then bending down to give Ellie a hug. "I love you, sweet pea. Be good, okay?" "Okay, Mommy. She's sensitive, so please don't scare her with stories or movies." "Nice," I said. The first day went well. Ellie was quiet but sweet, and we watched Finding Nemo, cooked grilled cheese for dinner, and she shrugged when I inquired about her father, saying, "Mommy doesn't like to talk about him," and then she was gone. She insisted on keeping her rabbit next to her pillow when I put her in bed at 8:30. "Good night, Ellie," I whispered gently, and she gave me a look. "Will you please keep the light on in the hallway?" "Obviously." I turned it on and left the door slightly open. I plopped down on the couch with my phone and microwaved some leftover lasagna. Outside, it was raining lightly and tapping against the windows. The wall clock was ticking steadily, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at ease. At midnight, I was browsing YouTube when I heard a soft thud coming from upstairs. At first, I assumed it was Ellie getting up to use the restroom. "Ellie," I called softly, but there was no answer. Her door was cracked open, so I pushed it slowly. She was sitting up in bed, holding her bunny tightly, her eyes wide. I muted my phone and listened to another sound, this time heavier, like someone pacing slowly across the floor. I got up, took the flashlight from my bag, and started up the stairs. "Hey," I said. "What's the matter?" "He's back," she said, gesturing to the window. "Who's back?" I scowled. "The sad man," she muttered, "stands in the yard and looks at me." My chest constricted, so I went to the window and peered out. Beyond the yard, there was nothing except the dark trees and rain. I forced a laugh, but she shook her head violently, saying, "He comes when Mom is gone. He stares and smiles, but his mouth doesn't move. Hey, I'll tell you what, I'll check the yard, and if there's a sad man, I'll chase him off myself." "Ellie, there's no one there." Maybe you just dreamed it. All right, she nodded slowly, and I went downstairs, got the flashlight on my phone, and opened the back door. The cold air hit me right away, and the porch creaked beneath my shoes. I looked around the yard, but all I could hear was wet grass and crickets. Ellie was asleep again when I returned, so I checked the locks and went to bed, but I couldn't get her words out of my head. He smiles and stares, but his mouth doesn't move. We prepared breakfast, painted, and played a board game. At about 4:00 p.m., I heard my phone vibrate. It was a message from Angela. Everything was fine there. The following day was peaceful again. The rain had stopped, the air smelled fresh, and Ellie appeared normal. Yeah, I said. All right. Ellie is okay. Good. Don't let her talk about her dad. Just avert her if she does. That sounded strange. I didn't respond. That evening, after Ellie had gone to bed, I chose to stay up reading until about 1 a.m. when I heard something again. It was a dragging sound rather than footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. I froze with my book still in my hands, and then the sound stopped, and then my heart began to race. So I got up, walked carefully toward the stairs, and listened. Ellie's room was at the top, and the hallway light was still on, giving the stairs a faint yellow glow. Ellie, I called out. Glow. Ellie, I called out. The door to her bedroom was wide open, and when I got to the top, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The bed was empty. The bunny was on the floor, and I felt a wave of panic and whispered, Ellie. A faint voice came from somewhere down the hall. Angela's bedroom. The voice said, Don't come in. I opened the door despite my initial suspicion that Ellie was frightening me. The room smelled of air freshener and detergent, and it appeared to be staged, with a spotless floor and a perfect bedspread, until I noticed a slight ripple beneath the comforter, as if someone was lying underneath it. Ellie, I whispered. The ripple stopped, and there was silence. Then, as if something heavy were crawling toward me from underneath, the middle of the bed sank in, and I stumbled back, gasping for air. The floorboards creaked, and I could hear the sheets shifting, the slight movement of weight pushing upward. Then, I smelled something rotten and foul, but it was covered up by air freshener, so I yanked the blanket back. He doesn't like it when people open Mommy's bed, so she sobbed, Ellie, get out. There was no one on top, but the mattress was a waterbed, and something was moving inside it. Through the translucent vinyl, I saw what appeared to be a pale face pressed against the surface from within, distorted, eyes bulging open. I screamed and staggered backward. Obtain now available. My hands were shaking so badly that I could hardly open the front door, so I grabbed Ellie and ran downstairs. I sprinted outside barefoot in the cold grass and didn't stop until I reached the end of the driveway. I called 911 with trembling fingers as the face inside the bed started to move, thrashing violently, bubbles forming under the plastic, if the thing was trying to rise. When the police arrived, they went upstairs, quickly drained the waterbed, and discovered a partially dissolved, decomposed body of a man in his mid-30s. The smell was unidentifiable, and it turned out that Angela had reported her ex-husband, David Meyer, missing 3 months prior. According to the neighbors, they used to fight a lot after their divorce, and she told everyone he had left the state. The police suspected otherwise, and Angela never showed up for her Salem conference. 4 weeks. I couldn't sleep without thinking about that bed, the sound, the smell, the face pressing against the plastic, and the worst part, sometimes late at night, I still hear that faint tap 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 sound like knuckles against glass. Her car was later found abandoned near the state border. I gave my statement, but the police had more questions than answers, and Ellie was placed in protective custody. I never saw her again. Doe. I recall Ellie's quivering voice stating, He returns when Mommy is away. When my marriage ended last winter, I packed what little I had left into the back of my Corolla and drove until I could no longer cry. Ridgeway wasn't home, but it was inexpensive, and my mother's old friend, Mrs. Adalton, offered me a spare room above her garage. I never imagined that I'd end up back there, that small, to quiet town where every corner looked the same. and every memory I tried to bury still lingered in the air like damp smoke. I survived on scraps for a while by working as a part-time waitress at a diner off Route 19, babysitting when anyone in town needed it, and selling some of my old clothes online. I told myself that it was only temporary, that one day I'd get back on my feet and maybe move to Chicago like I'd always planned. But that hope kept dwindling, especially after my ex Brad remarried and sent a polite text with a picture of him and his new wife in Cancun, which I stared at until I nearly broke my phone in two. They had a house on the outskirts of town, past the old quarry road, perched on a rise, overlooking the valley, and from their front porch you could see the entire damn town as if they owned it. A Thursday, the wind was sharp, carrying that early March chill that made your bones ache, and the place didn't look real, all steel, stone, and glass, the kind of house that didn't belong in Ridgeway, with no rusted mailboxes, chipped paint, or any a faint chime reverberated somewhere deep inside as I paused at the door, staring at my reflection in the tinted glass. My hair was tied up, and I had minimal makeup, but it was impossible to hide how tired I was. A few seconds later, a woman appeared, a blonde woman in her early 40s with impeccable posture and the kind of voice that never needed to be raised to be heard. "You must be Jenna," she said, smiling just enough to be courteous. "My name is Meredith Waverley." The smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she held out her hand, her diamond bracelet gleaming in the sunshine. "Thank you for coming at such short notice," she said. "Of course," I replied. "You brought up your spouse." With a quick glance in the direction of the driveway, she answered. "Oh, Greg's getting the car. We have a late dinner in the city. By midnight, we should be back." From behind her legs, her son Sam emerged, pale-skinned and with dark eyes that seemed too serious for his age. He couldn't have been older than 8. "Hey buddy," I replied, bending gently. "I'm Jenna. Your mom said we can hang out tonight." He didn't answer, just nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Meredith laughed lightly. "Too lightly. He's shy," she replied. "Follows in his father's footsteps." Greg showed up, then sporting a pricey grey coat, clean cut, and broad shoulders. He nodded quickly as if I were hired assistants. Meredith handed me a card with her phone number scrawled on it and said, "Everything you'll need is on the counter. The resident's address and the Wi-Fi password are the same. He needs to get to bed by 9, and he has already eaten. To go asleep. He normally reads to himself." After grabbing her purse, she glanced at Greg before turning back to face me. "And Jenna, too. Indeed. Don't answer the door if someone knocks." I scowled. "Anyone, indeed." Her voice became flat, intentional, even though they claimed to know us, particularly when Greg blared the automobile horn before I could inquire what she meant. She forced a second smile. Once again, "Thank you." And they were gone in an instant. It was silent for a time. Too silent. In contrast to typical dwellings, the house didn't hum or creak. It did nothing but wait. After making myself a cup of tea, I sat down on the couch and used my phone to pass the time. Every surface shown, every nook and cranny immaculate. There didn't seem to be anyone living there. Even the pictures of the family Meredith's flawless grin appeared fake. Greg's rigid posture. Sam looks at the camera as if he would prefer to be somewhere else. I went upstairs to see how he was doing at 8:30. He was already in bed, reading an old train book while sitting up straight and holding a tiny lantern beneath his blanket. "Hey, bud," I murmured. "Bedtime is almost here." He didn't look up, but he nodded. "Lights out at 9 o'clock, your mother stated." His voice was no more than a whisper as he turned a page. "When they depart, he arrives." I blinked. "Who shows up?" His dark eyes were large and serious as he gazed up. "The man in the glass. The man in the glass." Half smiling, half uneasy, I repeated. "You mean your own image?" He gave a head shake. "No," he observes. "He knocks occasionally." I made an effort to laugh it off. "You've seen too many terrifying films lately." "No," he responded bluntly. "He speaks to me." A shiver went up my spine. "What is it that he says?" "Nothing pleasant." He yawned and switched off his flashlight before I could ask him any more questions. "Jenna, Good night. Good night. Trying to get rid of the discomfort, I stayed for a moment before closing the door. Children frequently say strange things, especially lonely ones, I told myself. I was sitting in the living room, again at around 9, looking over my online nursing course textbook. I was about to unwind when the doorbell rang. The ring wasn't your typical one. It was lengthy and purposeful, as if the person who pressed it wanted me to be aware of their presence. My heartbeat accelerated. I went to the door's monitor and had a peek. Outside stood a tall man, perhaps in his mid-30s, with a dark coat, his hair slicked back, and great posture. He grinned straight at the camera. He said, "Hi, Jenna," in a suave voice over the intercom. My gut clenched. "I'm Owen, Meredith's brother." She said I could stop by for a few files. Greg forgot. Meredith hadn't said anyone was coming. I was not informed. "You can give her a call." He cut in with ease. "It's okay, she tell you." His voice made every nerve tense for some reason. It was more than just assurance. It was shrewd. I gave Meredith a call. 2 rings later, she picked up. She said, "Oh, Owen," hesitating. Her tone was strange, but she said, "He's family. It's fine." She spoke too quickly and too brightly. I questioned, "Are you sure?" She hung up after saying, "Yes, let him in, please." I opened the door a little by unlocking it. "Enter, I suppose," Owen said, entering as if he owned the space. The air was heavy with the scent of pricey cologne. He said, "Thank you, sweetheart," as he brushed by me. He touched my arm too purposefully. "This won't take long," he said as he made his way to the study down the hall. After a moment of feeling awkward, I sat back on the couch and pretended to read. Minutes went by, then some more. I discovered I hadn't heard anything from the study at 9:30. I went down the hallway and took a quick look inside. Owen sat at the desk, staring at the far wall where a giant window reflected us both. Without moving or looking for anything. "You find what you needed," I said, a little shaky in my voice. Without glancing at me, he grinned and said, "You wear vanilla lotion, don't you?" I froze. "What, vanilla?" Softly, he repeated. I'm transported back by that smell. He faced. I continued to smile, but it missed his eyes. He remarked, carefully getting to his feet, "You must be a student. These days, attending college is expensive." I took a step back. "I believe you ought to." He extracted a bundle of banknotes from his coat pocket. 15,000 for a single night. My throat shut. He put the cash on the desk. "Excuse me, you're too lovely to Jenna." Struggling. "Well, I believe you ought to go." He stepped closer and murmured softly, "Don't be difficult. I know you need this, and so do you." I stepped back again and grabbed my phone. "I'll call the police if you don't leave now." His hand sprang out quickly, clutching my wrist till I let out a cry. "No," he growled, "you won't. Give it up." I yelled, attempting to pull away. His breath was hot across my face as he leaned in closer. "You can scream all you want. Nobody is coming. They never do." I grabbed him by the ribs and drove my knee up hard before running down the hallway. The front door was unresponsive. Red blinks came from the keypad. Incorrect code. I heard him chuckle horribly and low behind me. I encountered the kitchen, snatched up the knife I spotted right away. I turned and looked around the hall, my hand shaking. Slow, deliberate steps. "There are 7 girls ahead of you," he called quietly. They didn't all last this long. My heart struck my ribs hard. "Remain behind." He emerged around the corner, beaming in the low light, and the last one fought. Had eyes that were simply similar to yours. I tossed the knife to divert his attention, not to hurt him, and fled upstairs. "Sam," I yelled. No response. I stormed into his empty room. There was a small gap in the glass, swaying curtain. A whisper then came from the closet. "Jean." I took it open. Inside, Sam squatted, looking as pallid as paper. He muttered, "He always comes. When they depart, he arrives." My eyes were scorched by tears. "We must ask for assistance." He gestured toward the phone on the nightstand. With trembling fingers, I reached for it and dialed 911. The voice of the dispatcher was heard. 911. "What emergency do you have?" "There is someone in the house," I started. But before I could say anything more, I heard Owen's voice coming from the corridor. "Is it going to be helpful?" The knife had grazed his shoulder, leaving a trail of blood as he entered the threshold. He had a zip tie in his other hand. "You are a very foolish girl," he snarled. He made a lunge. I shoved the phone in his face and screamed. It clattered to the ground while we fought. We tumbled toward the stairs after crashing into the wall and down the hallway. I bumped with the railing with my elbow. His fingers closed around my throat, pinning me down. "This was meant to be a clean house," he gave a hiss. "In this house, nobody fights back." Then sirens. The noise cut through the darkness. Eyes wide, he froze. "Who in hell gave them the call?" "I did," a tiny voice said. Owen pivoted. Sam held the cordless phone. He stood on the stairs, shaky but defiant. "I despise you," he said. "I also despise my parents." Owen appeared terrified for the first time. Officers rushed in with their firearms drawn as the red and blue lights blazed through the glass walls. While yelling orders, they threw Owen to the ground. It was over, yet he yelled. I found out later. In 3 years, 6 babysitters have gone missing. Everybody that the Waverleys hired is gone. Uncle wasn't an uncle. He participated in all of the couple's nefarious activities. The home itself, the money, and the secrecy are all components of their trap. That evening, Meredith and Greg were taken into custody. Several offshore transfers were connected to their accounts. Owen received a life sentence with no chance of release. Later, however, the true justice was served. Owen was discovered comatose in his cell head trauma from an unidentified injury 1 week into his sentence. He survived, but was never able to walk again. Sam was placed in foster care, a long way from Ridgeway. I go see him sometimes. He smiles more, but he's quieter now. I don't press him, and he doesn't discuss that evening. He saved my life, even though he isn't aware of it yet. And perhaps he will forgive himself for coming from that family when he is old enough to know what true courage looks like. There is no one living in the house on the hill, but it is still there. Residents claim to occasionally hear faint knocking coming from inside or see shadows move behind the glass at night. I no longer approach it. Not only do some locations preserve memories, they thrive on them, and it's still hungry at the Waverleys' house. I never imagined that I would be beginning again in someone else's guest room at the age of 36. However, that's precisely where I was on the night the papers arrived. Last name removed, divorce finalized, and quiet that was more burdensome than sorrow. Despite her best efforts to appear kind, my friend Tessa had offered her a spare room out of sympathy. "Just till you find your footing, Nora," she replied, giving me a shoulder pat as if I were a stray that had been plucked. I said, "Thank you," with a smile. In actuality, I had nowhere else to go. She rented a house in Cedar Hills, where there were white fences, quiet streets, and people who waved but never grinned too much. Families and those who still believed in forever were the target audience for this type of suburb. That's what I once thought, too. However, I caught my spouse after 15 years of marriage, and now former spouse, with a girl who continued to shop at Forever 21. So, yes, it was like learning to breathe again when I started afresh. Tessa worked as a realtor and was often on the phone. She showed upscale homes to wealthy couples who wanted to feel impoverished in a fancy setting while working late hours. I nearly burst out laughing when she told me she had arranged for me to work as a babysitter as a side gig. "Come on, Nora. It's only one evening. They're giving them easy money $300. Tess, I'm 36. I'm not a babysitter, and not even for a single mother with a damn museum-sized home." I took notice of that. I met Melissa Carter and her daughter Lydia in this way. Melissa resided in Cedar Hills' northern neighborhood, where the homes were more like statements than actual homes. With its contemporary glass panels shining like ice in the dusk, the Carter residence was perched on a hill. From the window of her living room, you could view half the city. She greeted me with a smile that stopped short of her eyes as I pulled into the driveway. Tall, well-groomed, and wearing fine clothes. She exuded beauty and seemed to have been holding her breath for years. "I'm so grateful that you did this," she remarked, tying an earring in the mirror. Lydia had already eaten dinner. "All she has to do is get tucked in by 9 o'clock, I said, trying not to seem uncomfortable. "No problem. According to Tessa, you only moved here 3 months ago." After the divorce, a shift was required. I smiled a little, knowingly. Become a member of the club. That time, her laughter was genuine. "Maybe we'll both make it through it." Lydia came up the stairs at that point. Her pale complexion and jet black hair gave her the appearance of someone who had stepped out of an ancient photograph. She was perhaps 9 or 10 years old. "Lydia, this is Nora," Melissa whispered softly, her eyes piercing as if she were examining me. "Tonight, she be staying with you." Lydia remained frowning. "You look," she stated bluntly, "like my teacher." "Yes, indeed. Is that advantageous?" She passed away. For a moment, the air became frigid. Melissa then gave a clumsy laugh. "Retired is what she means. Sweetheart, isn't that correct?" Lydia blinked slowly. "Yes." I remained in silence for a time after Melissa left, gazing at the enormous living room that resembled an art exhibition. More than a house, everything was flawless, too ideal. Not a single picture on the walls, not a dust particle. I slipped my suitcase onto the table and murmured, "You can watch TV if you want," while Lydia sat cross-legged on the white couch and watched me. "I don't like TV." "Okay. What do you like?" "Chatting." "That's convenient." Then, I grinned. She cocked her head and asked, "What do you want to talk about?" I chuckled uneasily. "Do you believe in ghosts?" "That's a big question for 9 o'clock. Mom says the house isn't haunted, but she lies about a lot of things." I stopped for a moment. "What sort of things?" "Similar to how my father departed." I took a swallow. "Sometimes parents tell lies to keep us safe." "She didn't keep me safe," Lydia whispered. "For a while, she buried him." I believed I had misheard her. "I apologize. What did you say?" She gave a shrug. I looked at her and said, "I'm tired." I wasn't sure whether to call someone or laugh. "All right, time for bed." Her room was located at the end of a lengthy hallway that was lined with large, erratic black and red brushstrokes used in abstract paintings. I was uncomfortable with them for some reason. Lydia's room was off, not disorganized, not eerie. The furniture appeared to have been set for a catalogue, as if it had never been handled. Just a bed, a lamp, and a little knit stand. No toys, no posters. I inquired, "Where are your toys?" They removed them. "Who was it?" She didn't respond. After tucking her down and shutting off the light, I remained in the hallway for a while, attempting to get rid of the cold that was running down my spine. I told myself I was only a child. Like you, she has gone through a divorce. Acting out. Before the knocking began, that is, it arrived at about 10:15. From someplace downstairs, there were 3 slow knocks. I listened and froze. Once more, the sound was heard. I reached for my phone. No signal, of course. With every step feeling heavier than the last, I slipped downstairs. There was a slight flicker in the kitchen light. I could see the driveway was empty through the glass wall. Melissa had lost her automobile. The neighborhood also appeared to be still. I looked toward the door. Locked. Lydia was standing at the bottom of the steps when I turned around. "Return to your bed, my love. The home is simply settling." She gave a head shake. "The house isn't it. The basement is where he is." I gazed at her. "In the basement? Who is it?" She gestured along the dim corridor. "Dad. According to your mother, your dad no longer resides here. She tells lies." I let out a sigh. "Okay. Just to be sure, how about we both check?" She gave a small smile. "All right, but you take the lead." I located the door to the basement. A padlock was used to secure it. I said, "Look, nobody's down there." Lydia's head cocked. "To prevent him from leaving. She locks it from the outside." She stated it in a way that made my stomach turn. I was prepared to contact Tessa at midnight and request that she come get me. To divert my attention, I sat on the couch and looked through my pictures. At that moment, I noticed a faint, quiet humming noise coming from upstairs. I called Lydia. No response. I went to her room to hearing the sound. Empty. The humming was coming from behind the locked door down the hall. I moved in closer. The humming ceased. Then a whisper came through the door's crack. The voice of a man. Hoarse. Feeble. Assist me. With my heart hammering in my chest, I staggered back. Who is present? Nothing. I reached for my phone. No signal yet. I yelled, Lydia, where is the number for your mother? Grinning as if she had been waiting. She emerged at the end of the hallway. He's with her. Who is it with? Dad? Both of them are down there. You simply knocked in the wrong manner. What on earth are you discussing? She approached with a shiny object in her hand. A little key. If you heard him. She instructed me to convey this to you. She shoved it into my palm, but I didn't want to touch it. Her hand felt icy. I gazed at the locked door and then at the key. Don't, my brain cried out. Avoid opening it. However, I did. I was the first to notice the fragrance. Damp metal. Although the basement was completed, the walls were dark and bare concrete. A wooden chair with a solitary lamp dangling over it, and there was a man sitting in the chair, dead 4 days, perhaps weeks. He lay slouched forward, his garments rigid, his skin grey, his wrists bound, his lips gagged. My knees nearly buckled. With my heart thumping so rapidly I felt it could explode, I stumbled for the stairs. Lydia was gone by the time I got to the hallway. Locked and dead-bolted, I ran for the door. I yelled, Lydia, you're where? From upstairs came a tiny laugh. It was wrong of you to open it. Is something wrong with you? What did you do? He was a villain. Calmly, she said. The house would remain quiet if we kept him, she said. But now it's becoming noisy once more. We've got to get out now. Lydia. She won't let us too. Headlights flashed through the window at that moment. Melissa was at home. I nearly burst into tears of relief. With her heels clicking on the tile, handbag in hand, and a set smile, she entered. Everything okay? She inquired lovingly. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then I noticed that she had something dark on her hands. Oh, that. She looked down. Jesus, Melissa. What happened? Down. Jesus, Melissa. What happened? Lydia stepped next to her, holding the identical butcher knife I had seen in the kitchen earlier, and said, It's just paint. We were working downstairs. I felt sick to my stomach. Melissa's tone grew softer. Did you not see him? I'm going to call the police. I succeeded. Nora, oh. Her smile was almost pitiful. You can't. The lines were cut. There is no signal up here. It's not your first attempt. Lydia outran me as I ran for the stairs. She said, You can't go. When they leave, the house doesn't like it. Lydia, get moving. She gave a head shake. You'll rouse him once more. Calm as ever. Her mother's voice emerged from behind me. It is preferable to not struggle. What did you do, Melissa? She said, I kept my family together. Most individuals can't say more than that. I heard the rest right away. I pushed Lydia out of the way and ran to the restroom, shutting the door. They battered it, first soft, then firmer. Melissa called Nora. Avoid making this is more difficult than it has to be. I glanced out the tiny window, insufficiently large for my shoulders. It was necessary. I ascended, rubbing my knees against the frame and pushing myself into the opening. When I fell to the damp grass below, the chilly air struck my face. The beating ceased. I ran until my lungs burned while I was barefoot and bleeding, until I arrived at the next house, a dim two-story with Christmas lights still dangling from the porch. I didn't stop. I knocked on the door and nobody came. A puzzled older man blinked at me. Are you all right, Mum? I attempted to talk, but all I managed to say was, call the police. By the time the police showed around, the Carter's home was dark, deserted, without Lydia or Melissa. The basement was clean, and the chair was gone. They looked 4 days and found nothing. They said that there was no documentation indicating that Melissa Carter had ever resided there. 4 months. The house had been unoccupied. Tessa insisted she found the number in a local directory. However, the contact was gone when she looked at her phone. And occasionally, I still dream about that house. The bleach-like stench of the hallway. Lydia's smile upon hearing my name. Every time I pass a for sale sign, I think of her, the girl in the blue nightgown. And I swear sometimes I still hear her humming. And that voice in the dark speaking through the door. Help me. I don't babysit anymore. I don't even like being in houses after dark. I made the decision to start over at the age of 39. I signed the divorce papers, packed up what little I cared about, and moved to towns over to a quiet neighborhood in Oregon called Brookhaven, where kids rode their bikes through puddles after the rain and the streets were lined with whispering pine trees. It was the kind of place people moved to when they were tired of being noticed. My name is Lily Warren, and after a 10-year marriage that ended with more shouting than love, I thought I'd try to put myself back together gradually. The house I rented was small, a one-story with creaking floors and wallpaper that peeled at the edges. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My neighbor, Mrs. Turner, came by with a warm pie and a favor. "Lily, sweetheart," she said, smoothing her apron, "would you mind watching the kids tonight? Just for a few hours. You're right next door and they adore you." I had previously worked as a crossing guard, a volunteer firefighter, and a police officer, but after the divorce, I wanted quiet work instead of dealing with people. I nearly said no. "They're good kids, just a little energetic." Her voice trailed off. That should have been a warning. The sun was already dipping behind the trees when I arrived at the Turner's house, which was nicer than mine. I wasn't really into babysitting, especially after everything I'd witnessed in my career, but her weary smile convinced me. "Sure," I said. "What time?" "We'll leave at 6 o'clock. Back before 10 o'clock. Emma, age 12, and Ryan, age 9, were sprawled out on the carpet, watching cartoons when I walked in. Lily, Emma, jumped up. "You're babysitting us. Looks that way," I said, forcing a smile. "You guys ready to be on your best behavior?" "Define best," Ryan said, smiling. The living room was large. The staircase was lined with pictures of happy faces, and the smell of vanilla candles filled the air. With the customary instructions, the parents departed. There was an almost unbearable silence after homework, dinner, bedtime, and the front door closing. As the children quarreled over what movie to watch, I busied myself in the kitchen preparing mac and cheese. "You don't even like scary movies," Emma screamed. Ryan screamed back, "Do too. You're the one who cried at Coraline. That's not even scary." "Then let's play Bloody Mary." I was frozen. "Stir the saucepan with the spoon halfway through." I looked over my shoulder and asked, "What did you just say?" "Bloody Mary," answered Ryan flatly. "You go in the bathroom, turn off the lights, and say her name 3 times. She's supposed to show up." "Oh, come on," I replied with a slight chuckle. "Does anyone still do that old thing?" Emma replied, "They say someone's mom tried it last year. Kids at school do." I interrupted her. "Dinner is ready," but they didn't dump it afterward. Ryan followed me down the corridor and pleaded, "Please, Lily, only once. We're not going to inform Mom. I told you not to tamper with that material." Emma argued, "You don't believe in it anyway." She was also correct. I didn't. Then no. However, they were becoming more tense, so I reasoned that amusing them for a moment could help them relax. "All right," I let out a sigh. "Just one round, then it's time for bed." We entered the large washroom with 2 mirrors facing each other on the upper floor. Thus, like a tunnel, the reflections continued indefinitely. That effect was something I detested. It caused me to feel lightheaded, as if there was something concealed beneath the clothes. Ryan was on tiptoe to get to the light switch, while Emma was holding a candle she had discovered in the kitchen drawer. "You're sure you want to do this?" I inquired. Ryan teased, "You're scared." I clarified, "I'm cautious, with the exception of the candlelight's slight flicker." The room grew dark. "Okay," Emma said in a whisper. "Speak it." I paused. I then leaned in the direction of the mirror and muttered it quietly to make a point. The candle flickered, and I swear for a half second I saw movement behind us in the reflection. "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, bloody," Emma said abruptly. I heard something. I rolled my eyes. "That's probably the pipes." "No," Ryan whispered. There was a faint drip 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 from the sink, but the faucet wasn't running. I whirled around and saw nothing but the shower curtain swinging slightly as if it had been touched. "All right, game over," I shouted, reaching for the door, but the handle remained in place. Ryan stopped toying about and cried, "I'm not." And then the candle went out. "Black," Emma screamed, and I jerked. "Black," Emma screamed, and I jerked. My phone was in my pocket as I struggled to turn on the flashlight, and then I saw her not in the reflection, but behind it, as if something was pressing against the glass from the other side, with long dark hair matted to her face, eyes that were hollow and wide like pits, and a mouth that moved but made no sound. Just fog against the glass, then crack. The mirror broke, and blood started to seep through the crack, if the glass itself was bleeding. Emma screamed once more, and I dragged them both toward the door, kicking it until the frame splintered. Every light in the house blinked off as we staggered into the hallway, and I gathered the children and hurried downstairs. The air felt heavy and thick, as if we were underwater. Lily and Ryan sobbed. "She's in the mirror downstairs, too." I looked, and he was correct. Every mirror and reflective surface in the house was pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, with faces flickering in them and hers multiplying. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and threw it over the large mirror. I shouted, "Stay close to me," but Emma froze in front of the TV screen, her reflection not matching her movements, and when she didn't, it smiled. "Lily, she's copying me," I said, and the reflection's mouth opened wider until it tore across the entire lower half of its face. I yelled, "We're leaving," not realizing that I had just unplugged the TV and shoved it face down. "Upstairs," I said, and as we ran into the parents' bedroom, I slammed the door and pushed a dresser against it, my hands shaking. I'd been in shootouts and fires, but never this kind of fear. "What does she want?" Emma whispered. "Don't talk," she said. Every lock twisted shut one by one like invisible hands were holding them. "Just stay close," I said. When Ryan started crying, I turned the flashlight toward the mirror above the dresser and saw Bloody Mary's hands slowly and deliberately dragging her fingernails down the glass. The scratches appeared on our side, bleeding through Lily, and Emma's voice trembled. "You called me." Something inside me broke. I grabbed the closest object, a heavy jewelry box, and threw it at the mirror. The glass shattered, pieces scattered across the floor, but even broken, the reflection remained. A dozen tiny shards, each showing a different angle of her face, appeared on the glass as she wrote something in thin red lines. Her voice was a whisper in my ear, yet she was feet away. "Trade, what?" I stammered. "1 for 1. She was no longer simply an image. The air grew cold, and my breath became foggy. Her skin was pale and damp, dripping as if she had crawled out of something deep. "Didn't comprehend?" "No," she said, pointing directly at Ryan. "Take me instead," I yelled, pushing him away. Her head twisted unnaturally to one side like a shattered doll. "Too late," she mumbled. The lights erupted back on, and she was gone. Ryan was unconscious. Emma was screaming. Emma refused to look in any mirrors after that night, and I moved out a week later. I told myself that I was done with Brookhaven, done with babysitting, done with pretending the world made sense. I checked his pulse, and he was breathing, but barely. His eyes briefly opened, and I heard him whisper, "She's in the mirror." When the parents got home, I was sitting on the floor, holding both children in tears, and they rushed him to the hospital. But the doctor said he was in some sort of shock, as if he had seen something he couldn't process. I moved into the house on a Thursday. The U-Haul truck rattled down that cracked stretch of Maple Hollow Road. The fall wind chased dry leaves across the pavement like tiny ghosts. The driver's window didn't roll all the way up, and by the time I got to the old house, the cold had set deep into the ground. I'm still not sure if what we saw that night was real, but I do know this. I smashed every mirror in my house, covered the bathroom mirror with a towel, and I leave whenever someone jokes about playing Bloody Mary. My ex-husband Ryan got the house in Columbus that I had chosen, the one with the red door and the maple tree in the front yard, that had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a porch that creaked every time you stepped on it. I took it because it was less expensive than anything else in town. And I needed space to think, to breathe, to forget that the last 7 years of my life had fallen apart like wet paper. He also got our dog. It's old, but solid, she said, adding, don't mind the noises this house breathes with the weather. If you hear scratching at night, it's just the raccoons. They love the attic. I tried to smile as the landlord, Mrs. Callahan, a wrinkled woman in her late 60s with a smoker's voice, handed me the keys. Something about the way she said, "This house breathes," didn't sit well with me, but I still laughed politely. The silence was harsh. When you live alone after years of arguments, you think you'll enjoy the quiet, but no one tells you that silence gets loud, like a ringing in your ears that never stops. I tried to block it out with music, but every song I played brought back memories of Ryan and me road trips, late nights, foolish dance-offs in the kitchen. Eventually, I just turned everything off and sat in the dark, listening to the wind. That night, I unpacked the bare minimum: a mattress on the floor, some sheets, my coffee maker, and a box labeled bathroom stuff. It was faint, like fingernails rubbing against the ceiling, and I heard it tapping from above around midnight. At first, I thought it was raccoons, because Mrs. Callahan had said that, but then the tapping became rhythmic: 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again, like someone knocking but slower. All right, I muttered, reaching for a broom. If it's an animal, it's going to be evicted. The house was old. Wood contracts and expands, pipes grow, floors settle. I went into the hallway and looked up at the ceiling, where the attic hatch was, an old wooden square with a hanging string. I yanked it down, but before I could climb, something moved up there, like someone moving their weight, and I froze. Then it stopped, and I waited. The wind outside howled through the chimney, and I told myself I was just hearing things. I slept with the lights on that night, though, and by the following week I had established my new routine. Get up, drive to the dental clinic, where I worked as a hygienist. Try not to think about Ryan. Come home, warm up frozen dinners, and fall asleep with TV noise for company. However, one night I came home to something strange. The porch light, which I never left on, was glowing, and at first I thought maybe Mrs. Callahan had dropped by, but there was no note, and the air felt colder than usual. I put my purse down and involuntarily yelled out, "Hello!" Silence, even though the heater was running and I could see my breath as I exhaled. I realized I had left the attic hatch slightly open the night before when I heard a faint creak upstairs. "Jesus," I muttered under my breath, my heart thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I went upstairs after getting a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The attic string dangled, the beam cut across the hallway, and dust particles floated like static. That night, I dreamed that I was back in Columbus, sitting at the dinner table with Ryan, but he wasn't looking at me. Instead, his eyes were fixed on something behind me, and when I turned, I saw a pale, faceless man standing just over my shoulder. I told myself that the hatch was open by about half an inch, but I still reached up and slammed it shut, claiming it was just gravity or air pressure. "No signs of forced entry," said Officer Drew Sanders, shining his flashlight up at the attic. "You sure you didn't track the mud yourself, officer? I know what my own feet look like." I screamed so loudly I lost my voice when I woke up and saw bare, muddy footprints in the hallway that led from the attic hatch to my bedroom door. The police arrived within 10 minutes. He nodded slowly, and I said, "I sleep with socks on. Those are bare prints. Be my guest," he said, climbing up, his boots thudding on the wooden beams above me. "Old place," he called down, and I swallowed hard. It smelled like something died up here. It smelled like something died up here. "Is there something up there?" A long pause. "Then there were no people, but you had a lot of old boxes and this." He came down with an old Polaroid picture, the edges of which were yellowed, showing a woman and a man, most likely from the 1970s, standing in front of my house. The woman looked scared, as if she didn't want to be there, but the man's arm was around her. "What's that?" "Probably the previous owners," I inquired. "You'd be shocked how many folks just leave stuff behind." I tried to act normal over the next few days, going to work, smiling for patients, and acting like everything was fine. But at night I felt like the house was watching me, and the attic creaked more. At times, I would wake up and swear I heard whispering from the attic. He gave me the picture and left his card, saying, "If anything else happens, call me, but maybe try to get a deadbolt for that attic vent above my bed." One evening, after locking the Polaroid in my drawer, I discovered it on my kitchen table. To pass the time, I began chatting to myself. "You're okay. Lisa, you're fine," I would mumble. "This is in your imagination." However, I wasn't, because the bathroom light flickered one evening as I was brushing my teeth, and the mirror behind me detected movement. I was at work that night when I was called by Officer Sanders. "Miss Quinn," he said, "you mentioned a Polaroid, right? You mentioned a weak sweet smell of decaying wood and something metallic, like blood." I froze, my toothpaste foaming in my mouth, and spun around, but nothing was there. I almost dropped the phone. "Yeah, well, I did some research. The people in that picture, Charles and Beverly Alden, owned your house back in '77. There was a domestic incident." "What kind of incident?" He exhaled slowly. "Charles killed his wife, claimed she was cheating, suffocated her in that house, and then hung himself in the attic that night." I went home determined to pack and leave, not caring if I had to crash at a friend's place or sleep in my car again. I just needed to get out. But when I opened the front door, the house was empty. "Are you serious? It's public record. Look, I know this sounds bad, but there hasn't been any trouble there since. It's probably just an old house giving you the creeps." But I knew deep down that what was happening wasn't just the creeps. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move, so I walked up the stairs like I was being pulled, and the humming got louder until I reached the door, where it stopped, and I pushed it open. The room was empty except for a chair in the middle, on which sat the Polaroid, and next to it, a plastic bag. It was dark except for one light shining upstairs, my bedroom light. The lights flickered, the air grew thick, heavy, suffocating, and I backed away slowly, my chest tight, my hands shaking so much I could hardly hold my phone. I called 911, but before I could say anything, the line went dead, and then the attic hatch creaked open on its own. I screamed and ran for the front door, but it slammed shut before I could get there. "Tell her I forgive her." I don't remember passing out when I came to. I was in the hospital. Officer Sanders was there. They said a neighbor heard me screaming and called it in. The police found me unconscious on the floor of the living room, the front door wide open. Then a rope dropped from above, swinging gently from the attic opening. A man's voice whispered from the darkness. I moved out that week, and it's been 4 months since then. I live in a small, quiet apartment in Dayton, and they searched again, but they found nothing. No rope, no plastic bag, no footprints, nothing. Mrs. Callahan swore the house had never caused any problems to any other tenant. Even though I burned the Polaroid, I never imagined that I'd be drawn into something like this. My name is Aaron, and nights are fine. I've learned to turn off all the lights and listen to white noise, but occasionally, just before I go to sleep, I hear it again. That's slow, steady tapping. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. And when I check my closet mirror in the morning, the Polaroid's reflection is always there, resting on the dresser behind me. After my divorce last year, I moved to Brookdale, a smaller town in Ohio, hoping for a quieter life. My ex-wife, Rachel, got the house and most of our friends, while I got the old Corolla and the peace of being left alone. My life had been quiet, painfully quiet, until I met Laura Bennett on a Thursday night when my phone buzzed with a new number. "Hello, I'm 26 years old and have been babysitting intermittently since high school. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept groceries in my apartment and gas in the car." "Hello, Aaron. This is Laura. I just moved to town with my kids and could really use someone this weekend. A church buddy told me you babysit." Her voice was quiet but unsteady, as if she hadn't slept through the night 4 weeks. "Okay," I responded. "When do you need me?" "Saturday night. Just a few hours. I will pay you $50 an hour in cash. I nearly chuckled, because no one in Brookdale paid that much, but I was behind on my rent, so $50 an hour sounded like a gift from heaven. All right, that sounds good. What time? 6 o'clock. I will text you the address. Saturday arrived grey and cold. The kind of October evening when the light goes out quickly and everything smells like wet leaves. Laura's house was on a tall, narrow house with chipped white paint, and the sagging porch swing that creaked in the wind stood out on the far edge of town, down a cracked two-lane road that cut through empty fields. A farol sign leaned against the steps, half buried in the overgrown grass. When I rang the bell, I half expected no one to answer, but then I heard soft footsteps and the lock turning. Laura opened the door, and she looked exhausted, not just a mother with children, but exhausted. Her eyes were red, her hair was a mess, and she had that hollowed expression. "You must be Aaron," she replied, her smile feeble. "Please come in. People get that when they've been running on fumes for excessively long." "These are my kids," Laura said. "Ellie and Noah. Say hi." Ellie waved shyly. The house smelled faintly of bleach and something else like damp wood. A little girl was coloring on the living room floor, and a boy, perhaps 7 years old, was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. "I've been quiet lately, and it's been a difficult transition." "No worries," I murmured, trying to sound friendly. "Kids take time to get used to it." Laura nodded, looking at the clock. "I shouldn't be long. It's just a dinner with a friend. You can help yourself to anything in the fridge." Noah didn't look up. Laura noticed inside. "Before I could ask," she said. "Old accident." I nodded awkwardly. "All right, I'll be back later." She left with a forced smile, her car headlights disappearing down the empty road, and the house fell silent except for the low hum of the TV. The child's bedtime is 9 o'clock, and as she spoke, I noticed faint but noticeable bruises on her wrist. Ellie showed me her drawings, which largely included stick figures and one of a tall, faceless man with extended arms. "Who's that?" She answered matter-of-factly. "That's the tall man," in response to my question. "Mommy says he lives in the walls." I chuckled quietly. "Spooky." She could not respond with laughter. "What do you mean lives in the walls?" "At night, he emerges. He speaks to Daddy, according to Mommy." It struck strangely hard. "Your father?" I asked thoughtfully. Ellie gave a nod. "He remains here. Mommy claims he's angry, though." The air appeared to get denser. I told myself it was merely childish banter, pretend play, and fantasy. I quickly shifted the topic, though. I turned to face Noah, but he was still glued to the television. However, the television was no longer on. I heard a slight bang from upstairs at about 8, like someone walking. Ellie stopped. "He's conscious." "Who?" She gestured up. "Dad." I made myself laugh. "Honey, your dad doesn't reside here." She didn't respond. The sound resurfaced, a dragging step across the ceiling, slow and deliberate. For the first time that night, Noah turned to face me and spoke softly. "Avoid going up there." My heart was already pounding, but I convinced myself it was pipes, the wind, or perhaps an old house settling. I thought I may give Laura a call, so I reached for my phone, but before I could, the screen flickered static, then dark. After dimming for a half second, the room's lights returned. I took a deep breath. I mumbled, probably a power surge. The children did not respond. They continued to gaze at the ceiling. I got to my feet. "Remain here." "All right." "No," Ellie snapped. "He will be upset if you leave." Every instinct told me not to go, yet I grinned as if it were a joke. I went anyhow. My weight made the stairway creak. It was darker than it should have been in the upper hallway. The lone light bulb above flickered feebly. 3 doors were present. Bedrooms made up the first 2. The third had a strong lock on the outside and was securely locked, and a gentle, repetitive thumping sounded from behind it. I took a swallow. "Hi there." Another thump. No response. I moved in closer. "Hi there. Is there a person inside?" I heard the whisper at that moment. The deep, hoarse-like voice of a guy. "Get out." I went cold. Once more, the whisper approached the door. Get out before she returns. I felt sick to my stomach. I muttered. She's not who she claims to be. I heard Ellie scream from downstairs before I could get up. I ran down the steps. There was nobody in the living room. It was still locked at the front door. Noah, Ellie. The sound of muffled sobbing came from the basement door. I pulled it open. I initially smelled mold and something metallic. The light switch was broken. Going down the creaking steps, I used the flashlight on my phone. My foot slipped on something moist halfway down. I regained my balance and pointed to the light. Hundreds of ancient photos, haphazardly put up, adorned the walls of the basement. Images of a man I didn't recognize, Laura, and the children. A black marker was used to scratch off the man's face in each picture. Then I noticed Ellie and Noah. They were sobbing softly while seated on the concrete floor. I hurried to them and said, "What are you doing down here?" "We should conceal," she said. In between sobbing, Ellie said, "Who?" "Mom," pointing to the room's corner. Noah pulled at my sleeve. "Wait till Daddy is calm again," she advised. My flashlight beam froze after following his finger. A man somewhat obscured by the darkness stood in the corner. A man, possibly in his 30s, with ripped clothing and rope-bound wrists. His eyes were half open, and his face was battered. I tripped backward and almost dropped my phone. "Help, she's coming," the man murmured as he glanced up at me. I heard footfall clicking slowly over the hardwood floor above heels. Upstairs, Laura's voice wandered. The man's eyes widened as he said, "Kids, I'm home." I turned to the children and said, "Don't let her see me." Laura came at the top of the steps, her smile too big, and said, "Stay behind me. Is everything all right down there?" I trembled when I spoke. "Laura, what's going on?" "You found him, I see." Her voice sounded almost informal. "He's ill. Sometimes he gets lost." She began to down the steps. The man croaked. "She's telling lies. Her husband is me. I was locked down here by her." For a brief while, Laura's smile wavered before returning. "Please, sweetheart. He's delusional. He harmed the children. You're not aware of his potential." I wasn't sure who to trust, but then I saw that her hand was glinting. A knife for the kitchen. I stepped between her and the children and said, "Put it down." Her gaze grew gloomy. "Everything is always ruined by him." Then she made a lunge. The knife cut a thin line across my forearm. I grasped her arm in mid-strike. I felt a sharp pain. I gave her a backward shove. She staggered and dropped the knife before screaming in wrath rather than pain. It was not a human sound. It was guttural. "The light. Turn on the damn light." The man yelled, "Animal." I pressed the switch once more. It sparked to life this time. Laura stood in the center of the basement with her face contorted and her eyes as dark as ink pools. For a moment, I wished it hadn't. Something moved beneath her skin, causing it to ripple. Ellie grabbed my leg and screamed. Laura's voice was layered, half human, half alien, as she snarled, "I own them. You are unable to take them." I took the children and fled. The man shouted, "Get them out," and attempted to crawl after us. "Don't turn around." I didn't. We rushed into the chilly night air through the front door. With my hands shaking so badly that I could not maneuver, I pushed the kids into my car and drove off. The house was deserted when the police showed up. There was only a burned-out basement light and an unoccupied room upstairs with a broken lock. No Laura, no husband, no pictures on the walls. I was not believed by the police, claimed that I must have dreamed that the child's parents were in a domestic circumstance. They took the children into detention, and I didn't see them again. However, I received a voicemail a week later. No number. Initially just static, then a murmur. "You ought not to have abandoned them there." I removed it right away, but the voice lingered in my mind. Occasionally, as I passed the town's outskirts, I noticed the house once more, lights on in the window upstairs, a shadow shifting. Additionally, occasionally late at night, I hear on my walls have a slight scratching sound, as if someone is attempting to leave. Scratching sound, as if someone is attempting to leave.